Chapter 22 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex is out, and while almost the entirety of the chapter does revolve around Boruto and Jura's fated rematch, there is a reveal at the end of this chapter that has even me confused. And even outside of the massive reveal that Boruto's strongest move may not work against his strongest possible opponent, this chapter also revealed to us just how exactly Jura felt about the other Shinju, showing us as to whether or not he would give in to the weakness of his human side and try to save the likes of Ryu and Matsuri from their thorn bulbs being returned to the arboreal forms of the people who created them in the first place, or if he would rather throw out all sentimentality and feelings about Ryu and Matsuri in order to make sure that Boruto doesn't escape the battlefield this time around. And while nobody like Shinki or Moegi was freed from their tree forms, and the entirety of Team 7 and 2/3 is still on the same battlefield as Jura with no real retreat plan in mind, a lot happened this chapter that gives us hints about what's to come in future chapters. So while chapter 22 may have seemed to many as all punchy, no plotty, I can guarantee you there's a lot more happening behind the scenes than you realize. So with no further ado, let's get directly into chapter 22 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video a week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to the tuning exams. Gaara has shown up. So, chapter 22 picks up exactly where chapter 21 left off. That is, with Ryu floating through the sky as a soul thorn, and Matsuri finally diced and ready for cooking. But in the first panel of chapter 22, we cut to Mitsuki and Rhea, who are watching Ryu's soul thorn float through the sky. And while Sarada has eliminated the most dangerous foe on the battlefield, at least for their side of the equation, they are still surrounded by augmented Clawgrimes, who all have the ability to turn them into trees and therefore more Shinju. So their fight is not technically over yet, though the Clawgrimes don't really pose that much of a threat to either of them. Which is why Mitsuki, who's holding on to the unconscious Sarada, turns to Rhea and says, Rhea, I'll deal with the Clawgrimes, you get Ryu's soul thorn. And it's at this point that Mitsuki says something fairly interesting, but really not all that surprising. See, when he's telling Rhea to get Ryu's soul thorn, he's telling Rhea to bring Ryu's soul thorn to Shinki. Now, that might seem like relatively common knowledge, like duh, of course the soul thorn has to go back to Shinki. We actually haven't got any information about how somebody is broken out of the tree that's grown around them. As to whether or not it required destroying the soul thorn or returning the soul thorn to the tree, we didn't know. And with it now being revealed by what Mitsuki says to Rhea, that the only way to break somebody out of a tree that's grown around them is to return that soul thorn to said tree, this blasts open the door for possibilities of what could happen to people like Shinki and Sasuke when they come back into the equation. See, because if hypothetically we just had to destroy the soul thorn, and that when the soul thorn was destroyed, the tree that grew around Moegi, Shinki, Sasuke, Bug, you know, all of the progenitors of the Shinju, then there could definitely be a pretty solid argument to be made that the power that once belonged to the Shinju isn't gonna feed back to the person that made the Shinju. It's just that at one point they were in a tree and now they're no longer in a tree. Maybe you could make an argument that because that person was wrapped in the power of a divine tree for however long they were in said divine tree, that they could waltz into some iteration of Ten Tails chakra, but that feels kind of like a stretch. However, with it now revealed that a soul thorn has to go back to a tree to break somebody out of said tree-based prison, the possibility of every single person who's been caught up in a tree blending their own power with that of the Shinju that the soul thorn came from is now highly likely. See, here it's been established that the soul thorn is the core of the Shinju, the proverbial heart, the center that an entire Shinju can be built around, displayed by the fact that every single soul thorn has a Rinnegan in its base. So if you combined this Shinju core with an incomplete divine tree grown around a ninja, the combination of these powers could very easily feed into that ninja who was once trapped in a tree. And while the idea that every single ninja who eventually turned into a Shinju once they get a soul thorn combined with their tree is gonna awaken something like a Rinnegan seems unlikely, mostly based off the fact that the idea of Moegi with a Rinnegan seems ridiculous. I don't feel as though it's ridiculous to assume that everybody who does come back from their tree prisons will come back with some kind of boost to their power. And whether that's a form of regenerative ability that gives people like Sasuke his Rinne Sharingan and his right arm back, or a literal Rinnegan awakening, I do believe there is a fair chance that we're gonna see people like Shinki and Sasuke get some pretty massive boosts to their power, which is why I've theorized in previous videos that we're even in the Land of Wind in the first place, simply to introduce a new powered up version of Shinki that will be able to train alongside Team 7, working as effectively Boruto's Yamato, being able to seal the power of Boroshiki that now seems as though is going to make an appearance more than ever after the events of chapter 22. Anyways, moving forward, we then cut to the second page of this chapter where we see Jura popping out of one of the claw grinds that's surrounding Mitsuki and Araya and the unconscious Sarada. And immediately, both Mitsuki and Araya are not only terrified, but also identify the fact that this is Jura, the leader of the Shinju. It's important to note here that neither of them have seen Jura before. Team 10, Himawari, Naruto, Mitsuki have all seen Jura, but Mitsuki hasn't. Now, rather interestingly, when Jura appears on the battlefield, he approaches his entrance onto the battlefield in a very Jura-like way. That is to say that he ignores literally everybody who he doesn't currently want to kill. And thus, even though he could have ended the lives of Mitsuki, Araya, and Sarada in a mere blink of the eye, simply levitates out of the claw grind, locates Boruto, and dips. But before he flies away from Araya, Mitsuki, and Sarada, we do see a moment where his vision hangs on Sarada. And I find this interesting because there's really only two reasons this kind of scene would be included. The first is that Jura has identified Sarada as a threat and is genuinely contemplating as to whether or not he should kill her right now while she's unconscious. And the second reason is the fact that Jura knows that Sarada is the person who killed Ryu, and Jura may actually be upset with Sarada for killing somebody close to him in Ryu. However, in an attempt to make sure that human emotions never creep into his psyche, he decides rather that he should go out of his way to kill her because she is, after all, who Hidari wants to consume, and therefore technically has nothing to do with him. Regardless, after letting his vision hang on her for a mere second, he looks away. And this is interesting because in this moment, he's also looking away from Ryu's soul thorn, which baffles Araya because Araya assumes that the reason that he's currently on the battlefield is to get Ryu's soul thorn. But no, he's seemingly not there to save his comrades. In fact, it appears as though that the only reason he's on the battlefield is for Boruto. Now, this seems to prove that Jura backs up what he talks about. Jura spent the last couple of chapters saying that the only weakness that the Shinju could ever be subjected to is the human emotions that they may be affected by. And this is why Jura has spent the last couple of chapters talking about the idea of love, a topic he actually talks about a lot in this chapter. And thus, maybe in a ploy to make sure that he truly has no love in his heart, he doesn't try to save any of his fallen comrades, something he did do for Hidari. Regardless, after it's revealed that Jura is not there to save his comrades, we cut to Konohamaru and Boruto, who are standing over Matsuri's diced corpse. And we see Konohamaru turning to Boruto and saying, "Oh wow, you killed that divine tree ridiculously quickly." To which Boruto says that Matsuri was already pretty beat up, and if she wasn't so beat up by Konohamaru's Rasengan, it wouldn't have been as easy to cut her down as it was when he did it. Now, it's this point that Matsuri's body begins to disintegrate and form a soul thorn. However, as the two of them are watching this soul thorn form, something whizzes past their heads, which causes them both to snap back to where this projectile landed, and Konohamaru to ask the question, "What was that?" To which Boruto responds, "A mini Bijou sniper bullet." To which he follows up by saying, "It's Jura. He's here." We then cut back to Jura, who kind of scoffs and goes, "Ha. It missed. A pity." And then immediately fly off to where he's identified Boruto's location is. Now, it's important to note here that if Jura missed a Bijou sniper shot on a standing still Boruto, that they must be miles apart. Which makes sense because, like we established in our last couple of videos here, Matsuri didn't know that the rest of Team 7 and 2/3 was fighting against Ryu while she was talking to Konohamaru. And thus, they must have been separated by a pretty great distance. Now, when Jura flies away, Araya asks Mitsuki where he's going, to which Mitsuki responds by saying towards Master Konohamaru. And at this point that we see back where Konohamaru is, that Matsuri's soul thorn has finally begun to form, and thus Konohamaru snags it. And thus, in this moment, Konohamaru confirms what we talked about earlier, and Ikimoto giving us this piece of information twice into the same chapter is absolutely a hint about what's to come. Keep that in mind. As he turns to Boruto and says, "Boruto, this soul thorn will return Moegi from her arboreal form, right?" Arboreal being one, a hella $5 word to throw into the Boruto manga, and two, meaning tree-like state. But Konohamaru is confirming what Mitsuki told us earlier in the chapter, which is that if you want to break somebody out of a divine tree, you have to insert their soul thorn back into the divine tree. Presumably presumably combining the powers of the person in the divine tree and the Shinju. But before Konohamaru can get a response from Boruto, Boruto throws a bunch of shuriken all around him, prepping for a battle against Jura, because, mind you, he can only use flying Raijin to metal items that he's marked with his chakra. He then, in probably a rather confusing moment for Konohamaru, turns to him and says, "Master, there's no time. Take that soul thorn, get the rest of Team 7 and 2/3, and go to where you met the Sand Village Ninja initially. And once you get there, await for further instructions." Now, Konohamaru, very much in a Sakura trying to stab Obito in the eye kind of way, does not listen to the person who is very much establishing that they are in mortal danger. And thus, as Konohamaru stands there stunned, Boruto turns to him and says, "You heard me, move." But as Konohamaru still doesn't move, Boruto has to take the action into his own hands, as Jura, who is currently nuking towards their direction, fires a Bijou bomb at the both of them, and Boruto has to pick Konohamaru up by the scruff of his neck like he's his kitten and throw him out of the way of the explosion. Now, rather surprisingly, even though Boruto just picked up Konohamaru probably faster than he's ever moved in his entire life, and then literally threw him, and Konohamaru just came off his second place finish for most wooden splinters in the back in the Naruto universe, Konohamaru sticks the landing of being thrown by Boruto and gets moving, soul thorn in hand. And while Jura sees Konohamaru running away with the core of the Shinju, who may be the only person who can make more Shinju and Matsuri, either he doesn't try to stop Konohamaru, or Boruto pushes the offensive to him before he does try to. See, we see Jura watching Konohamaru run away. And while you can say, oh, well, Jura could have gone after Konohamaru, or maybe could have fired a sniper shot at him, both of those things take time. Time that Boruto did not give Jura. And this is important because Matsuri is an important person to Jura. Even if you want to separate the emotional aspect of it and say that the only reason that Jura was crying when Matsuri was being betrayed by Konohamaru is because he shares any and all feelings with every single one of the Shinju through their connected Rinnegan, and therefore because Matsuri was crying, he was crying. The only person that we've ever seen reconstruct destroyed Shinju or make new Shinju is Matsuri. And while there's a fair to decent chance that Jura is also able to do it, we've never seen that. So even from a non-emotional standpoint, the loss of Matsuri is a pretty substantial tactical loss, and thus one would assume that if Jura was going to save anybody on this battlefield, it would be Matsuri. But maybe in an attempt to show that he has no human emotions and doesn't have the weakness of love, he was going to let Konohamaru get away. But for the moment, we can't really say, because as soon as Jura realizes that Konohamaru is running away, Boruto is behind him, Rasengan in hand. See, because Boruto used all of the shuriken that he had thrown around the battlefield to use flying Raijin to teleport behind Jura and blow his back out with the Rasengan. However, even after Boruto down spikes that bird like a Mario fighting a Falco, Jura in the air readjusts and looks back up at Boruto, gathering and firing a Bijou bomb at him. However, before it's able to connect, Boruto once again uses flying Raijin, but this time to the ground. The ground that Jura currently has his back to. And thus Boruto appears behind Jura with his hand on his sword. And as he goes to land what is effectively a flying Raijin slice, Tobirama would be proud, Jura once again readjusts in the air and blocks the slice with his claw mark clad in middle finger, which I think, is impolite. Jura then slides back on the ground and him and Boruto stand facing off against each other. And as Jura stands across from Boruto, he says, "The flying Raijin. It's impressive translocation you have. It's a bad habit, but fighting against an opponent as skilled as you makes my heart flutter with joy." Now, this is interesting because one, Jura is identifying what he's saying as a bad thing, but two, Jura is admitting to the fact that one, he can feel joy, and two, sometimes he just likes fighting for the sake of fighting, which is not a primal instinct. See, while Jura may technically lack any and all empathy, and has a stark misunderstanding of why anybody would put their life on the line for other people, Jura is openly admitting here that battling against Boruto is something he enjoys. A battle that doesn't technically need to happen, and thus Jura is putting his life on the line by battling against Boruto for no real reason. And that is a humanizing emotion, and an important thing to keep an eye on here moving forward. Jura, who claims to be completely separated from the weakness of human emotion, does experience joy. Now, it's at this point that we cut to Ada and Kashin Koji, and we see that Ada is watching this battle unfold using her Senrigan and reporting the status of the battle to Kashin Koji. And she's telling Kashin Koji that it seems as though Boruto is holding his ground quite well. "Are you sure that he has no chance to win against Jura?" To which Kashin Koji responds by saying, "Yeah, no, I'm like 100% sure. There is literally no way he can win, and Boruto knows this." And thus Ada says, "Well, then if he's in that bad of a pinch, why doesn't he teleport away?" To which Kashin Koji responds by saying, he can't, even if he wanted to. See, long-distance flying Raijin is tricky. Boruto's flying Raijin depends on teleporting to marked pieces of metal. And the further Boruto is from those marked pieces of metal, the harder it is for him to find them and thus jump to them. Even more so when he's trying to do all of this while avoiding a powerful opponent like Jura. And that is like kind of an explanation for why Boruto wouldn't be able to get away, but let's be real, it's not a good one. Like, Boruto was able to jump all the way to the Land of Wind from his hideout with Kashin Koji before Kashin Koji could react. Kashin Koji, one of the 10 most powerful people and therefore one of the 10 fastest people in this universe. Like, yes, it has very clearly been established in the early part of TBV that Boruto took a second to jump to Code's location because of how far away the piece of metal he was trying to track was, but that's mostly because Code jumped to a different dimension. Like, yeah, obviously from the hideout to the Land of Wind is a pretty big jump, but we've seen Boruto make jumps comparable to that amount of distance almost instantaneously. So I really don't buy into the idea that Boruto couldn't jump away from this battle if he wanted to. And thus, I think the real reason that Boruto cannot abandon this battle is what Kashin Koji says next, which is that if Boruto fled right now, he would be putting Team 7 and 2/3 in danger, and both Ryu and Matsuri's Thorn Bulbs would be back up for grabs from Jura. Like, sure, Jura is prioritizing Boruto right now, but if Boruto wasn't on the battlefield, there's really no reason that Jura wouldn't try to get Ryu and Matsuri back into the equation for the Shinju. And therefore, the real reason that Boruto is on the battlefield right now is so that he can stall Jura for long enough so that Konohamaru and the rest of Team 7 and 2/3 can get somewhere safe with the Soul Thorns. And thus Kashin Koji says that Boruto is, without a doubt, done for. Now, we all know that that's not the truth. Obviously, the main character of the story is not going to die 2 separate times. However, the fact that it has now been established that Boruto is stuck on this battlefield with Jura gives a ridiculous amount of credence to the theory that I've been peddling for the last couple of weeks, which is that Boruto, when pushed into a corner in a battle against Jura, is unfortunately going to have to unleash Boroshiki. In fact, in this next chapter, I believe when Boruto realizes he has no options in this battle against Jura, and his death actively leads to the destruction of the planet, when he realizes that the entire battlefield is clear of everybody not named Boruto and Jura, he will use his karma marking in a last-ditch effort to gain enough power to get a leg up on Jura. But the usage of the karma marking will lead to Momoshiki taking over his body. And that is only corroborated by how this chapter ends. But we're not there yet. Anyways, after Kashin Koji signs Boruto's life away, we cut to Jura, who's telling Boruto, Tsutsuki, I'm sure you know this already, but I'm here to kill you because you know way too much about us as divine trees. And I'm not quite sure how you know this much about us as divine trees, but it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna end your life. But before I do kill you, why do you know so much about us? Is it your accomplice that's the source of your intel, referring to Kashin Koji? But Boruto, who is very actively no snitch, doesn't respond to any of Jura's questions. And instead, he just stares at Jura as he thinks that surely Jura must have taken some damage from the Rasengan that blew out his back. Boruto realizes that Jura doesn't seem injured and that he can't get a read on what Jura's current state is, and thus he believes that the only way that he'll be able to bring down Jura is Rasengan Uzuhiko. And while Boruto's thinking all of this, Jura continues to have his one-sided conversation as he proceeds to ask Boruto, okay, I'll ask you one more question out of pure curiosity, Boruto. What is love? My current opinion is that it's a concept that can be a fatal flaw to you highly intelligent humans. Take you, for example. You have a minuscule chance of winning against me, and yet here you are on the battlefield to save your friends. In other words, love lured you here to the place of your death. And it's this point that 4 wooden spikes fly out of the ground like the mouth of a giant worm trying to consume Boruto. But Boruto jumps out of the way. But as he's in the air, more wood release tracks him through the air. And he has to spin mid-air and unleash Sasuke's katana and cut this wood before it can get to him. But like a college frat bro drunk off cheap beer, the pursuit of this wood is relentless. And thus Boruto begins to scramble, trying to find a way to land a Rasengan Uzuhiko on Jura. And he thinks to himself, damn it, without placing my feet on the ground, I can't use Rasengan Uzuhiko. Because for those of you who don't remember, Rasengan Uzuhiko requires that Boruto place both of his feet on the ground to charge it. Because Rasengan Uzuhiko uses the energy of the Earth's rotation and orbit, applying the centrifugal force of a spinning globe to an opponent. And thus Boruto throws Sasuke's sword and allows himself to be captured by the wood, putting him in an eerily similar situation to the first time he ever came face to face with Jura, as he's held against his will will, pinned from all angles. And Jura, with his hands in his pockets, begins to walk towards Boruto. However, eventually Jura walks to Sasuke's sword. And as he stops in front of it, Boruto tells Jura that that's a precious object I borrowed from my master. And if you do anything to it, you will face a fate worse than death. But this intrigues Jura, and thus he picks up the sword and says, well then, once again, you will suffer due to love. And thus Jura picks up Sasuke's katana and looks at Boruto and says, how about this? This sword will retain its original shape if you just tell me where your accomplice is. Once again, referring to Kashin Koji, who, mind you, Jura knows next to nothing about. But Jura goes on to say that either way you'll be dying, so it doesn't really matter all that much. Now, to this point that Boruto begins to enter this big old love conversation that Jura wants to have, as he tells Jura, you might be right about love being a flaw and the key weakness of us humans. But, and like a friend about to give you incredibly bad advice, Boruto goes, this is just my opinion. And as he says this, he blows the wood all around him away with a Rasengan, allowing him to place his feet on the ground and begin to charge Rasengan Uzuhiko as the power spirals around his body. He tells Jura while he charges up this power, that is precisely why you'll never be more than just trees. Now, it's this point that he uses flying Raijin after channeling the power of Rasengan Uzuhiko to jump to his sword, something we've seen him do multiple times. And after landing behind Jura using his flying Raijin, Boruto is able to strike his back with a Rasengan Uzuhiko. And thus we see the circular power of the Rasengan Uzuhiko transfer from Boruto's body to Jura's, much akin to how we saw this transference of power when Boruto hit Code with the same attack. Now, for those of you who are wondering why being striked with this attack didn't immediately vaporize Jura like it did to Hidari, well, that's because Boruto didn't have that much time to charge his Rasengan Uzuhiko. Remember, he has to charge it. And while it does kind of sound like a weakness, because inherently it kind of is, it's important to note that there's technically no limit to how much power Boruto can generate using Rasengan Uzuhiko if he has enough time to charge it. But considering the fact that he was only able to charge his Rasengan Uzuhiko for about a second, he had more focus on the motion sickness aspect of the Rasengan Uzuhiko than the destructive ability of it. And thus as Jura flies away from the force of being hit with a Rasengan Uzuhiko, because mind you, a Rasengan Uzuhiko is still a Rasengan, and therefore it still has the blunt spiraling force of a Rasengan, and thus the ability to blow you away. It also, because it uses the power of the centrifugal forces of the earth, makes it almost impossible for you to stand up straight, because you feel as though you're perpetually spinning until eventually you die. And this is exactly what happens to Jura. He once again seems relatively unaffected by the blunt force trauma of the Rasengan and sticks his landing, but like a James Bond 007 intro where we're staring down the barrel of a gun, we see from Jura's point of view a conical spiral looking at Boruto, but Boruto's now upside down, and Jura stumbles to the ground, clearly affected by Rasengan Uzuhiko. And thus Boruto, believing that this fight has now been won, sheathes his sword as he says, your sense of equilibrium has been mucked. The whole world will appear as though it's spinning. I doubt you'll be able to fly, and even standing will be difficult. To which in response Jura says, this power, and then he strikes himself in the chest, and we see the spirals that were encompassing his body blast out of his back. After which he stands up, much to Boruto's shock, and says, it seems to follow the same principles as my bijou bombs, and thus I know how to nullify it. And thus, with the last panel of chapter 22 of Two Blue Vortex, Boruto is realizing that Rasengan Uzuhiko, his trump card, does not work on his strongest possible opponent. But where does that leave Boruto for chapter 23? Well, I'll tell you, it's up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. We have seen a lot of crazily impressive things from Boruto, whether it was easily defeating Kawaki or Mitsuki or blowing away Hidari. But when it comes down to it, the strongest offensive moves he has are Rasengan or Rasengan Uzuhiko, the only two abilities with enough offensive output to be able to destroy a Shinju like Jura. And this is undoubtedly something that Kashin Koji knew, and therefore why he never believed that Boruto stood a chance in this battle. But it is important to note here that presumed 10 Paths user Momoshiki is constantly baffled by what Boruto was able to do, as Boruto seems to constantly defy all expectations that are possibly conveyed to Momoshiki through the power of Future Sight in 10 Paths. All that is to say that the future that that Boruto may be able to make happen is not one that Kashin Koji can see, as he himself has identified that Boruto has been walking a very, very narrow tightrope that has narrowly avoided the apocalypse multiple times. And thus I believe how Boruto will end up avoiding the apocalypse this time around is, like I've said in most of my previous videos, which is that Boroshiki will emerge in the next chapter, and that Araya, who is currently on his way to Shinki to return his soul thorn to him right now, will get Shinki after Jura has presumably fled the battle in the battle against Boroshiki to seal away Boroshiki and thus give Boruto a moment to re-cede control of his body. But none of that has anything to do with basically the first thing that I said in today's video. The fact that this chapter ends with a cliffhanger that I myself barely understand. And that cliffhanger was the reveal from Jura that for some reason or another, Rasengan Uzuhiko seems to work with the same principles as Jura's bijou bombs. For the life of me, I can't really make sense of that statement. See, we don't know a ton about Jura or Rasengan Uzuhiko or Jura's bijou bombs, but we do know a fairly decent amount about bijou bombs as a concept. And there's really no reason for us to believe that Jura or Himawari's tailed beast bombs operate any differently from your standard tailed beast bomb. Well, sure, Jura appears to be able to use tailed beast bombs in ways that we've never seen, like a tailed beast ball sniper, and sure, Jura's tailed beast bombs are generated in front of his right Rinnegan, something we've also never seen, as they're usually generated from the mouth. We've gotten multiple close-up looks of Jura's tailed beast balls, and they seem to abide by the same rules as every other tailed beast ball, in that they appear to be comprised of the 8-to-2 positive to negative chakra ratio, as all of his tailed beast balls are majoritively black with some white specks. The black part of the ball being the black positive chakra, and the white specks in the ball being the white negative chakra. But nothing that we've learned about the Rasengan Uzuhiko has had anything to do with positive or negative chakra. In fact, let me read you literally everything that we currently know about the Rasengan Uzuhiko. The Rasengan Uzuhiko is a new form of the Rasengan that utilizes not only one's own chakra, but also the planet's rotation and orbit, plus the corresponding centrifugal and other forces. In addition to the damage that a standard Rasengan causes, it destroys the target's sense of balance, debilitating them. Due to the unceasing nature of planetary movement, the effects of the Uzuhiko do not fade, resulting in not just physical harm, but also untold psychological damage. Boruto refers to the planetary energy used for Rasengan Uzuhiko as the planet's chakra, but this is not the same as the nature energy used by ninjas such as Naruto and Mitsuki when they enter Sage mode. No mention of positive or negative chakra. It's not a jutsu that's formed in your mouth or with a Rinnegan, and the only real connection between these two jutsus is the fact that the Rasengan was formulated as a response to tailed beast balls being used by Jinchuriki by Minato so Kushina could stand a chance in potential fights. And maybe that's the connection. Maybe Juro was able to deduce the true nature of the Rasengan, which is the core of Rasengan Uzuhiko, and say, oh, hey, these seem eerily similar because after all, the Rasengan was formulated in the image of a tailed beast ball, but that feels thin. I mean, there is also the fact that the Rasengan Uzuhiko seems to combine the chakra of the user with the chakra of the planet, and maybe those chakras are combined in a similar 8-to-2 ratio, but that's never been told to us or confirmed. There is also the fact that technically bijou bombs can get as large and therefore as powerful as humanly possible. There is literally no limit to the size of a bijou bomb, just so long as you're able to continuously balance the power of the 8-to-2 positive to negative chakra. And the Rasengan Uzuhiko also technically has no power cap, as Boruto is able to suck in as much power into the Rasengan Uzuhiko as he has time. So like there are some similarities between a bijou bomb and the Rasengan Uzuhiko, but based off the current verifiable information we have right now, it feels too thin to be like, oh yeah, Jura is completely unaffected by Uzuhiko. But I am curious to hear what you guys believe is the connection between Rasengan Uzuhiko and a bijou bomb. And if you have any ideas, tell me about them in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to be rereading this chapter a couple of times to get some theories going.